They told you ghosts were just stories, whispers for the weak-minded. But on a rainy evening in 1849 in a quiet Massachusetts town, a 12-year-old girl named Emma Fitzgerald sat in the dark, and something began to answer her. It wasn't the kind of answer a child should ever hear. It wasn't a voice from the room. It was a voice from beneath it. The sound crawled up through the floorboards, not in words at first but in a slow, deliberate knock. 1, 2, 3. Her mother thought it was the wind. Her father thought it was rats in the cellar. But Emma knew. The first time it spoke, it told her a name. The second time, it told her where the body was buried. The third time, it told her why. What happened next would not only drag Emma into the center of America's most feared spiritual scandal, but would expose the machinery of control behind every official version of reality you've ever been given. Because this is not just the story of a girl hearing the dead. This is the story of how power feeds on the invisible, and why those who see beyond the veil are silenced. You're going to hear things in the next few minutes that will make you question whether your thoughts are your own, or if they've been placed there. But I warn you, once you step through this door with me, you can't unhear what's waiting. So lean in, because the dead are not silent, and neither are the people who profit from them. The night after that first whisper, Emma didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, fear was already behind her, but because she felt a presence pressing against her thoughts. It wasn't just the knocking anymore. It was conversation. The voice told her about the neighbors. Not what they showed in daylight, but what they hid. It described hidden rooms in their basements. It spoke of money that changed hands in the dead of night. And it spoke of rituals. Things performed in secret under the old oak by the river, where no one dared to go after sunset. Emma repeated what she heard to her parents. They silenced her instantly. Not out of disbelief, but because they recognized the names. These were not rumors. These were people whose handshakes decided laws. People whose donations built the church. People who could erase a man from the records as easily as crossing out a line of ink. And here was a child, pulling their secrets out of the air. Her father locked the cellar door that night. Her mother burned the dress she had been wearing. But none of it stopped the voice. Because Emma had opened a channel, and channels once open are not easily closed. Within weeks the town began to change. It started with whispers in the market. Strangers glancing over their shoulders. A minister delivering sermons on the devil's tricks, while his hands shook over the pulpit. You see, Emma had told one person too many, and the truth began to leak like water from a cracked dam. The wealthy feared scandal. The church feared blasphemy. But the real threat wasn't moral panic. It was exposure. Because the voice told her more than just crimes of passion or stolen fortunes. It spoke of a system. It revealed how disputes were settled long before they reached the courts. How the preacher, the banker, and the sheriff all answered to the same unseen hand. This was not coincidence. It was architecture. And the walls of that architecture were made of silence. The same silence they were desperate to force back into Emma's mouth. But silence has a cost. And for the men who ran this town, that cost was blood. The first attempt on her life came in the form of a fire. It began in the barn, at least that's what the sheriff's report would claim. But Emma woke before the smoke reached her room, because the voice warned her. It told her who lit the match. It told her the man's real name, not the one in the church registry. And it told her that this was just the beginning. When she escaped into the woods that night, barefoot and choking on ash, Emma crossed into a part of the forest where the air seemed heavier. And there, beneath the gnarled limbs of trees older than the town itself, the voice changed. It was no longer just one. There were many. They spoke over each other like a crowd pressed too close. They spoke of centuries. Of families that had built their fortunes not on hard work, but on deals made with things that could not be written in any history book. And they told Emma the truth. The dead were not haunting her. They were recruiting her. Recruitment is not always an invitation. Sometimes it's a takeover. By the winter of 1849, Emma's eyes no longer seemed like a child's. People described them as knowing. As if she saw more than the person standing in front of her. The voices taught her patterns. How to read the pauses between a man's words. How to hear the weight in a woman's silence. How to sense the invisible strings pulling the people in the room. But this knowledge came with a warning. You will be hunted, they said. Not because of what you know, but because you can't be controlled. And in this world, whether in a small town in 1849 or the sprawling cities of today, there is nothing more dangerous than a man or a girl who cannot be controlled. Emma's transformation had begun. And with it, the war over her soul. Because the living wanted her silenced. The dead wanted her weaponized. And Emma Fitzgerald was starting to choose sides. The first confrontation didn't happen in the dark. It happened in the blinding light of the Sunday congregation. Emma sat with her parents, the hymn book heavy in her lap. The minister's voice echoed through the chapel, a voice meant to soothe, but today it shook. Mid-sermon he paused. His eyes locked on Emma. And for a long, cold moment, the air between them seemed to hold something unsaid. Then, a different voice filled her mind. Not the whisper from the cellar. Not the crowd from the woods. This one was sharp. Metallic. It said, "He serves them. Do not believe his words." Emma blinked, and the minister's lips were still moving, but the voice in her head was already dismantling his sermon. Every phrase, every passage, every holy declaration, exposed as nothing more than a code. A code meant to condition, to bind, to keep the flock obedient. This was Emma's first glimpse into the oldest form of control, belief as a weapon, and she realized something terrifying. The man speaking from the pulpit wasn't in charge. He was just a mouthpiece. The whispers began naming names. Not just local families but people from elsewhere. A banker from Boston. A judge from New York. A military officer whose face never appeared in newspapers, but whose orders shaped the movements of entire regiments. The voices spoke of meetings, gatherings that left no record. They described strange symbols carved into wood and stone, visible only at certain hours of night. They described oaths taken over wine mixed with ash. Emma didn't want to believe them. But one name kept repeating. A name that would come to dominate every shadow she stepped into, the Council of Nine. They were not elected. They were not known. And yet, they sat at the very top of the invisible hierarchy that ran her world. The voices told her the council had heard of her. And they had decided, she would not live to see 13. When the hunter comes for you, they don't arrive with guns drawn. They arrive with smiles. A woman came to the Fitzgerald home that spring. She said she was a spiritual advisor, sent to help Emma close the door to the dead. But the moment her hand touched Emma's shoulder, the air turned heavy. The whispers fell silent. And in that silence, Emma understood. This woman was not here to help. She was here to sever the connection. She carried tools, a silver pendulum, a vial of black liquid, and a book that smelled of burned leather. Every page of it was covered in diagrams, circles within circles, names written backwards, lines that felt wrong. When Emma refused, the woman smiled. The kind of smile that says, "You've just made my job harder, but not impossible." She left before sunset. But 3 nights later, Emma awoke with blood on her hands. She hadn't cut herself. The blood wasn't hers. This was the point of no return. Emma buried the bloodied cloth behind the house. But the voices told her it was a message. The council was warning her that even her own body was not entirely her own. From that night forward, the connection changed. The whispers became lessons. They taught her not just to hear, but to send. Emma learned to push thoughts into the minds of others. At first it was small, a single word in a stranger's head, a sudden urge for someone to turn around, look away, or forget a question they had been about to ask. But the voices warned her. Power is never free. The more you use it, the more you will attract them. And by them, they did not mean the dead. Emma's first strike came by accident. The town's sheriff, the same man named by the voices on the first night, stopped her on the road. He leaned down from his horse, eyes glinting. "You ought to keep quiet, girl. You're making folks uneasy." Something in her snapped. She didn't speak. She just thought the word, "Kneel." And he did. Right there in the mud, staring at the ground like a man stripped of his will. It lasted only a few seconds. But in those seconds, Emma understood the real reason the council feared her. She wasn't just a danger because she heard the dead. She was a danger because she could command the living. From that moment, Emma Fitzgerald was no longer prey. She was becoming a weapon. Weapons are only feared when they're loaded. And Emma was now carrying something the council had spent generations keeping out of human hands. Direct influence over the will of others. The first time they came for her, they didn't send soldiers. They sent children. Boys from the town, boys Emma knew from the market, arrived at her door holding gifts. Fruit, ribbons, small carved toys. But the moment she touched them, she felt it. A weight in their minds, a dark cord pulling them like puppets. The whispers roared in warning. These were not visitors. They were carriers. Every toy, every ribbon, every slice of fruit was marked with something old. Symbols carved not with knives but with intention. Marks designed to weaken her connection. Emma burned them all. But burning a gift is burning a message. And the council does not take offense lightly. The retaliation came in dreams. At first, they were simple, strange faces, distorted places, shadows that moved without light. But soon, the dreams bled into waking hours. Emma would be at the table and suddenly see the noose above her head. She'd be walking through the market and taste ash in her mouth as if the town was already burning. The whispers told her. These are not visions. They are rehearsals. The council was showing her possible endings not to warn her, but to wear her down. A man can fight an enemy in the flesh. It is harder to fight one in the mind. But here's the mistake they made. In showing her how they planned to end her, they taught her exactly what to guard against. The council was preparing for war. So was Emma. War in 1849 didn't look like it does today. There were no headlines, no armies in matching uniforms. There were whispers in alleys, poisoned wells, burned letters, and missing faces. The first to vanish was the blacksmith's son, a boy who had once defended Emma against the jeers of other children. His disappearance was no accident. The voices told her the council had taken him as bait. She followed the trail into the woods, the same woods where she first heard the crowd of whispers. There she found not the boy, but the remains of a circle burned into the earth. The soil was black. The trees around it leaned away, as if they were recoiling from the memory of what had stood there. Emma understood. The boy was gone. But something had been left in his place. It began to follow her. At first, she thought it was a shadow cast by her own lantern. Then she noticed it moved when she didn't. It was tall, taller than any man, and its outline was wrong, the angles too sharp. The whispers were divided. Some told her to confront it. Others told her to run. But Emma was learning something the council didn't want her to know. Fear can be used both ways. So she stopped running. One night, as it stood at the edge of the tree line, she turned and stared into the place where its face should have been. She didn't speak. She thought, kneel. And though the thing had no knees, it bent. Not in obedience, but in acknowledgement. It had been sent to kill her. Now it was listening. This was the breaking point. The council had seen enough. They could not afford to let her grow stronger. And so they decided to strip her of the one thing she had left, her identity. It started with rumors. Emma was possessed. Emma had cursed the crops. Emma was consorting with demons. By the time summer came, the town didn't see a girl anymore. They saw a threat. A disease. The whispers in Emma's mind grew urgent. This is not about truth. This is about control. And control requires isolation. The council's strategy was clear. Erase her reputation, turn her allies into enemies, and make her so hated that no one would notice when she disappeared. They thought she'd be broken. Instead, Emma decided to make the first strike. The first strike had to be invisible. Not a public act. Not a headline. Something so small the council wouldn't see it until it was too late. Emma began in the market. Not with food but with words. She leaned close to the butcher's wife and whispered a single phrase the voices had taught her. Not in English, not in any language the woman knew, but in a tongue older than the soil beneath their feet. The woman's pupils dilated. Her breathing slowed. The next day, the butcher refused to sell meat to a known council associate. The day after, the banker's wife refused to attend a gathering she'd never missed in 20 years. Emma realized the truth. Control spreads like disease. And if the council could spread fear, she could spread doubt. Doubt is more dangerous than rebellion. Rebellion can be crushed. Doubt lingers. It infects. Emma began planting it in the minds of the people the council relied on most. She never told them what to believe. She only made them question what they already did. The minister began hesitating in his sermons. The sheriff started avoiding certain roads at night. Merchants stopped extending credit to the council's men. And all of this was happening without Emma lifting a blade. Because the sharpest weapon isn't steel. It's uncertainty. The whispers told her. They built their empire on the illusion of inevitability. Show them it can be broken. And that's exactly what she did. The council struck back. Not with threats, with offers. A messenger arrived carrying a letter sealed in black wax. It promised protection, wealth, and influence, in exchange for her silence. The voices hissed in warning. Emma didn't tear the letter. She kept it. Because every offer is proof of fear. By refusing, she sent her own message. She would not be bought. And worse for them, she would not be silenced. That night, she carved a symbol into the old oak by the river. Not a threat. A declaration. I am not prey. Her defiance forced the council into a position they hated, visibility. For the first time, Emma saw two of them in the open. Not in shadows, not in whispers. In daylight, speaking with townsfolk, smiling as if they were simply visiting gentlemen. But the voices told her who they really were. One had ordered the burning of villages during the last war. The other had overseen the disappearance of witnesses in a trial that never made the papers. Emma walked straight past them. She didn't bow. She didn't lower her eyes. And she let them feel her gaze like a blade against their necks. That was when she understood. Fear works both ways. And now, they had reason to fear her. The more she pushed back, the more the voices changed. They were no longer just warning her or guiding her. They were following her lead. Emma began speaking to them directly, asking questions, demanding answers. Some resisted. Others answered with a loyalty that felt almost personal. One voice in particular, deep and steady, began teaching her more than just survival. It spoke of power structures and psychological anchoring. It taught her how people can be led without realizing they're being led. And then it said something that froze her blood. The council is not the top. There is another hand above them. And if you wish to end this, you must be ready to face what even they fear. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because deep down she already knew. She was going to climb that chain of power, no matter how high it went. The council's power didn't live in their meetings or their rituals. It lived in the invisible agreements everyone had already accepted. Emma understood. If she could break those agreements, she could break the council. She began with money. Not stealing it, redirecting it. Whispered suggestions to merchants about changing trade routes. Quiet instructions to farmers about selling to different buyers. Small changes so subtle they looked like coincidence. Within weeks, the council's invisible tax, the cut they took from every transaction, began to dry up. And with it, their ability to pay off enforcers, fund surveillance, and keep their agents loyal. They didn't know yet who was behind it, but they felt it, like a man who wakes to find his blood slowly draining. Next, she went after the belief system. Every power structure needs a story, a myth, to justify itself. For the council, that story was the church's sermons about divine order. Emma didn't attack it head-on. Instead, she told a different story. One whispered at wells, in kitchens, at the market stalls. She spoke of ancient agreements between the living and the dead. Of rulers who were chosen not by bloodline, but by the ability to hear both worlds. It was dangerous, because it planted a thought the council couldn't kill. If power comes from the ability to connect with the unseen, then maybe Emma, not the council, was the rightful leader. The first cracks appeared inside the council itself. One of their own, a man known only as the treasurer, sought her out in the night. He didn't come to arrest her. He came to defect. Emma asked why. His answer was simple. They've forgotten fear. They think themselves untouchable. You've reminded them they can bleed. He gave her names. Not the ones the whispers had already revealed, but the outer circle. The men and women who carried out orders without ever knowing who gave them. Merchants, officers, teachers, even doctors. Emma realized something chilling. The council wasn't just a group. It was an infection. The infection was deeper than she imagined. The treasurer told her about the conditioning rooms, places where individuals were broken down, their will erased and rebuilt in service to the council's plans. These weren't prisons. They were schools. Not for children but for adults, bankers, judges, military officers. People who'd been retrained to think in alignment with the council's doctrine. Emma saw the strategy for what it was. They didn't need to control everyone. They only needed to control those who controlled the rest. The voices grew louder, urging her to destroy these rooms. But they also warned her. Once you interfere with their conditioning, you will no longer be a local threat. You will be a global one. Emma didn't hesitate. She targeted the first conditioning room on the edge of town. It was disguised as a storage barn, empty by day but filled with activity by night. She didn't burn it. She did something worse. She walked in unannounced and broke the trance of every person inside. She whispered their real names back to them, told them memories they had been taught to forget. And when the council's handlers tried to stop her, she used the same single-word command she'd used on the sheriff months ago. Kneel. By the time she left, the room was silent. Not because they were afraid, but because they were free. And somewhere far beyond the town, someone watching through the council's network finally said, "She's ready." The first sign that she had crossed into a higher battlefield was the silence. For weeks, no council agents came. No threats. No whispers of retaliation. The voices told her this was not mercy. It was observation. Others are watching now, they said. Those who give orders to the council are deciding what to do with you. One night, a cold wind passed through her room though the windows were shut. And a new voice spoke. It was not human. It was not dead. It said only this. You've stepped beyond your place, child. And now you must be tested. The test came as a choice. The power above the council, the ones the whispers called architects, did not work in direct conflict. They worked in offers. A letter appeared on her table without a sound, its seal marked with a single black circle. Inside was a proposition. Join them. Learn their design. Gain a place among those who shape history, not from the shadows of a small town, but from the highest vantage. The whispers screamed in protest. The treasurer's warning echoed in her mind. They don't recruit. They absorb. And once you're absorbed, you are no longer you. Emma didn't burn the letter. She tore it into 9 equal pieces. And she buried each piece in a different place in the woods. The retaliation was immediate. The next morning, the entire town woke to find the river had turned black. Fish floated belly up. Livestock refused to drink. The council told the townsfolk it was Emma's doing, a curse for rejecting their guidance. But Emma saw the truth. This was the architect's first lesson. Show the people a disaster, give them a villain, and they will beg for the very power that caused it to save them. She walked the riverbank, her bare feet sinking into the poisoned mud. And she swore aloud. If you think fear will bring me to my knees, you have not been paying attention. The architects changed tactics. They sent dreams. Not like the council's. These were not visions of death or fire. They were visions of possibility. Emma saw herself dressed in silk, speaking in grand halls, her words bending the wills of kings and generals. She saw riches, armies, entire nations aligned to her command. The voices warned her this was bait. The architects knew her strength, and they also knew her temptation, the desire to use her power without limit. Every dream was a bargain. You can change the world, if you change yourself into one of us. She refused. And with refusal came the final escalation. The sky over the town turned the color of bruised steel. Birds fell dead in the fields. Children woke screaming with no memory of why. Emma stood in the center of it, feeling the pressure build around her skull like hands trying to crush it. The whispers united for the first time, their voices overlapping in a single, thunderous command. Stand. And she did. Not just against the council. Not just against the architects. But against the system, the ancient machinery that had been feeding on the living and the dead for centuries. She knew now. Her war was no longer about survival. It was about breaking the design. The origin came not from the whispers, but from the silence between them. On a night when the woods were still and the air pressed heavy on her skin, Emma felt a presence unlike any before. It was not a voice, not even a thought. It was a memory. But it wasn't hers. She saw a place older than cities, where men and women knelt before stones carved with spirals that seemed to move when no one touched them. A bargain was struck there, life for influence, death for obedience. The living would feed the dead with ritual, and the dead would guide the living with knowledge. But knowledge was never the end. It was the chain. The first to make that bargain called themselves the architects, and they had never broken it. Emma understood then. The council was just a mechanism. The architects were the engineers, and the rest of humanity was the raw material. This was not about power for its own sake. It was about maintaining a perfect loop, souls fed into the system, stripped of memory, recycled into bodies, kept ignorant of the design. The whispers told her the truth they had been forbidden to say until now. Every voice she'd heard was part of the loop. Every ghost was a prisoner still serving the architects. Emma's connection to them wasn't a gift. It was a breach in the wall. And breaches can spread. The moment she realized that, the architects struck again. Not through fear, not through temptation, but through history. They erased her. Old letters with her name crumbled to dust overnight. Neighbors swore they had never seen her. Even her parents' memories began to shift. They remembered a child, but not her face, not her voice. The whispers panicked. If the architects could erase her from history, they could erase her from the loop entirely. Not kill her, remove her from ever having existed. But Emma knew their mistake. To erase her, they had to acknowledge she was a threat. And acknowledgement was the first crack in their perfection. She began to work in that crack. Using the same techniques the architects had used on her town, Emma planted herself back into memory, not as herself but as an idea. A shadow in the corner of a room. A woman seen once and never forgotten. A rumor about a girl who could make men kneel without touching them. The whispers amplified her, carrying her image into dreams, into the pauses between thoughts. She was no longer a name they could erase. She was a pattern. And patterns, once recognized, are almost impossible to unsee. The architects tried one last time to negotiate. A figure came to her in the forest, not quite human, not quite spirit. Its form shifted as she looked at it, as if it could not decide what shape would intimidate her most. It offered her a seat at the table. Not as a servant, not even as a peer, but as a replacement. One of the 9 could be removed and she could take their place. For a heartbeat, Emma felt the weight of what that meant, control of nations, of wars, of history itself. And then she remembered the loop. The cage. Her answer was the same as it had been to every offer before. No, Emma knew the only way to break the loop was not to fight it, but to interrupt it. The whispers told her of the anchor, the single point in the cycle where all souls, living and dead, passed through before being reassigned. It wasn't a place in the world. It was the gap between worlds, a nowhere that existed in the instant between a last breath and a first cry. Reaching it required an act no sane person would attempt. She would have to die. Not for long. Just enough to step into the anchor and corrupt it. She prepared for weeks. Every night, the whispers mapped the way, warning her of the dangers. Every morning, she woke more certain that she might never wake again. The night she chose was cold, the kind of cold that feels older than the air around it. She lay down in the hollow of the forest floor, a knife in her hand, the earth pressing against her back like a coffin already half closed. The whispers became frantic, not in fear for her, but because they knew the architects were watching. One voice, older than the rest, told her something she would never forget. If you succeed, they will never forgive you. If you fail, they will never let you go. Emma's breath slowed. Her vision blurred. And the world unhooked. The anchor was not light, not darkness, but pressure. A crushing, infinite presence, like every decision ever made, every secret ever kept, was folding in on her. Souls streamed past, faceless, voiceless, being funneled back into the game without memory. She reached out, touching the current. It burned, not with fire but with recognition. It knew her. And in that moment, Emma released what she had been building for weeks. A seed of disruption. An image of the truth, planted in the path every soul would now walk. The anchor screamed. Not in sound but in fracture. Across the world, people began to dream of her, people who had never met her, never heard her name. A girl in a forest, her eyes like open doors, whispering. Remember. The architects tried to patch the breach. But the truth was already moving too fast, carried by minds waking in the night with the taste of another life in their mouth. Emma was gone from the anchor, But she was not gone from the world. She was everywhere. No one knows where she is now. Some say she walks among the living, speaking in the pauses between sentences. Others swear they've seen her in mirrors that didn't quite match their reflection. But one thing is certain. The loop is broken. Not destroyed, just fractured enough for men to see the bars of their own cage. And once you see the bars, you start to wonder what's beyond them. So here's your choice: forget her and you'll sleep easy tonight. Remember her and the architects will know you've seen through the design. But remember this: once you start hearing the whispers, they never really stop.